All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Kyle Farmer, and I run the business development team here for the U.S. East. And with me is Mark Horvath, one of our sales engineers here at SafeNet. And we are going to discuss a topic here about the Internet of Things and more about, is it a security risk or a monetization opportunity? So Mark's going to go through some information about this, and at the end we'll do some questions and answers. And if you have anything during the session, just type it into the chat window, and we'll address it at the end. So, Mark, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. So, hello everyone. My name is Mark Horvath. I'm a sales engineer for SafeNet's software monetization division. I work out of our headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland, and I've been with the company for about 4 years now. So here's today's agenda. We'll begin the presentation by introducing the Internet of Things. I'll provide some published industry statistics for you. After the introduction, we'll dive a little deeper into the IoT and identify the three major layers of its ecosystem: the hardware sensor layer, the interconnectivity layer, and the application management layer. We'll also present a chart that shows examples of some of the many players from small to very big within the industry. Just a second here. IoT presents a business opportunity for many organizations, and at this point we'll identify how the IoT vendor can implement monetization solutions to connect, control, and manage within the industry. A SWOT analysis will be provided for those who will be operating and monetizing in the IoT space. As a result of our experience, at the end of today's presentation, we'll readily offer 3 actions that you can take today to monetize your IoT offering. Please feel free, as Kyle mentioned, to submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll cover the answers at the end of the presentation. In May of last year, just a few days after he became Intel's new CEO, Brian Krzanich announced a new devices division in the company to focus on emerging trends, including ultra-mobile devices. This is subsequently documented in an online article from PC World. Contained within that article is a 2012 diagram of an Intel software framework to help manage data flowing in and out of what they call the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is a vast collection of network-connected devices like smart TVs and app-powered refrigerators that is becoming increasingly ubiquitous in our lives. Here we see that slide, and note that Intel specifies that the devices must be managed, connected, and secured in the ecosystem. These notions are essential for effectively monetizing today's modern IoT offering. Customers are no longer simply requesting to purchase in perpetuity monolithic software packages, but rather they are interested in pay-per-use license models for both the application and the data it produces. Aids to assist the management, connectivity, and security of the IoT ecosystem help in this area. Another chart, this one produced by Cisco's Internet Business Solutions Group, coincides with the Intel's presentation in that we see that it's projected by the year 2020 that there will be nearly 7 connected devices for every single person in the world. Yet these are more statistics that highlight the growth of IoT within the next decade. So why is everything becoming connected? It's simply because it can. Technology advances, for example, IPv6 and equipment cost reductions enable the fact that nearly everything can now have an IP address. Wi-Fi transceivers have shrunk and reduced in cost to a sub-dollar range. RFID tags can be attached to many small devices. Broadband and wireless mobile technologies such as 4G, LTE help in the movement of data throughout the ecosystem. Roughly 10 years ago, market analysts coined the phrase, data is the new oil. In a 2012 article, Forbes magazine stressed that companies need to think about new business models that exploit this valuable resource. The vast amount of data available allows companies to create business intelligence to track how their customers are using their products for such things as billing purposes. This opens up a new way to create new selling opportunities and increase operational efficiency. Here we see examples of the platforms that make up the IoT and applications and building blocks of the Internet of Things. As you see, companies listed here may range from tiny 1 to 2 person startups that you probably haven't heard of to major international corporations. Personally, you'll look on the left-hand side, on the application side, you'll see that it's one of the devices that I use. I use a Fitbit fitness band that shows how many steps I take per day. And sometimes it reminds me of how many little steps I take per day while I'm sitting in front of my computer screen. Did you even know that they now have a fitness tracking device for dogs? My sister-in-law has a device, it's called a Whistle, that they sell at PetSmart, that for her 2 lazy 150-pound Newfoundland dogs, that she tracks how many steps, basically in the dozens that they take, and how long, in terms of minutes, these busy, lazy dogs are awake. As a matter of fact, when my wife and I were vacationing with my sister-in-law and her husband in the Caribbean earlier this year, my sister-in-law was able to bring up on her iPhone to make sure that her dog sitter exercised these dogs. The key point here is that multiple separate yet interconnected and interdependent players exist in this market. The connectivity and management of IoT devices must be fit in at the beginning of these devices' design. The IoT layer can be broken into 3 main layers. The IoT ecosystems can be broken into 3 main layers that we see here. There are opportunities for monetization at each one of these layers. We'll dive into these layers in the upcoming slides. Our first layer is a sensor layer. Sensors are the lowest layer of the ecosystem. This is where a true embedded system begins. A sensor in my iPhone, for example, can determine how fast I'm going. It is also able to adjust the positioning of my screen when I tilt it. But sensors come in many areas to collect temperature and humidity data, microphones to collect sound, cameras to collect video, and those type. Our next layer is the network connectivity layer. As I identified in the Intel diagram shown earlier, connecting the lower layer sensor devices in the IoT world plays an important role. Among others, network equipment manufacturers, cellular providers, device manufacturers, all have a play in the IoT connectivity layer. Of course, for real-time monitoring and data collection, it's essential to have all of the billions of IoT devices interconnected. But disadvantages exist as well, notably in the area of security. Security breaches do exist. Data is the foundation of information. This data is no longer free and it must be secured from breaches. After collecting data through all of these connected sensors, there must be a way to provide this data in a meaningful information format. Data analytics extract relevant information from the massive amount of raw data. Streaming analytics process data in real time. Again, securing this data is essential. So let's pull this all together. Here we see the IoT is already here. Aside from my Fitbit that I mentioned earlier and the iPhone example that I mentioned, consider the truly smart car as an example. A smart car that is not only able to alert you, the driver, that service is needed, but instantaneously also your mechanic. Sensor devices already exist to assure and alert that medications are being taken. Home energy consumption can be monitored and tracked as necessary. For example, there exists the Nest system that is used for in-home environment maintenance that you may have seen at your local Home Depot store. So wrapping it all up, and as conveyed in the charts shown at the beginning of this presentation, IoT's footprint is huge. Verticals from consumer, medical, automotive, industrial, and even the military are all areas that are touched by the IoT. Here's another angle when referring back to the Intel CEO's manage, connect, and secure slide that I showed earlier for the IoT. It becomes obvious that when we say IoT components should be managed, licensed, and also protected. For example, when connecting devices in the IoT system, there must exist ways to manage this connectivity. Licensing individual features can control the sensor network. Consider an environmental system, for example, one that may just measure temperature that can be used in various environments as needed by the end user. The end user can pay one price for standard resolution, say measuring temperature in integer values, but in times when he needs it, another higher price is paid for higher degrees of precision. For example, measuring tenths of degrees. If the end user temporarily needs that precision, he would pay for that precision. And all this has to be protected with all the intellectual property that is within these devices has to be protected and should be tamper-proof to maintain revenue. Software monetization, such as those provided by SafeNet, provide IP protection to prevent the loss of revenue from IP theft. Tools allow the software vendor to flex their pricing strategy, deploy software in multiple ways. It's no longer just a perpetual or subscription model, but now we have pay-per-use models. Pay-per-use models from the cloud or even directly in the embedded device and everywhere in between. This ability can lower manufacturing costs in the way that a single device, for example, our variable precision temperature sensor, for example, can be deployed yet elastic enough to adapt to the end user's requirements at a moment's notice. So here's our SWOT analysis of the IoT marketplace. In order to save time, I'll just cover a few items here. In the strengths area, the great part of the IoT marketplace is that it's really fast growing. You may recall from my layers and players slide all the small to medium companies that participate there. Many have received large financial backing to prosper. Though some of the smaller players are just beginning, the larger players have existed for many years. Large-scale customer usage and tracking are in place, not only for billing purposes, but for business intelligence purposes to fine-tune the performance of smart devices. With the advent of high-volume data everywhere comes the threat that exists that you must protect and maintain that data, and most importantly, the information that's produced by this. This cannot be an afterthought, but rather should be built in to mitigate this threat. Also, from a macroeconomic or geopolitical standpoint, laws and regulations for IoT are still being developed and must be taken into account. Here at SafeNet's Software Monetization Division, the IoT isn't really anything new that we've been, over than what we've been doing for many years. Over the years, we've provided solutions to many customers in the embedded space. For example, our customers produce gaming systems, they're medical device manufacturers, or GIS manufacturers. These are just a few examples. From a network connectivity standpoint, we work with key players such as Cisco, Brocade, and the like. Based upon our experience, we offer 7 actions that you, the software vendor, can take in the IoT space and that you can use to monetize your IoT solution. In the first bullet here, we see that the first area, it addresses an area that I mentioned in my smart thermometer example. Single devices can offer different intelligence at different times based upon user demand and thus the licensing presented to the user. A license management back office solution, and number 2, we specify that it facilitates the ability to control online and offline entitlements. It should be necessary. Number 3, we say to protect your valuable intellectual property, A method to prevent this theft from reverse engineering and or unlicensed software usage for your solution is really needed. Now, continuing on in number 4, we say look at your marketplace. Understand what your users are using and also what they're not. Use this to build awareness on what's happening around you. And be prepared to offer your product in many different ways. For example, a consumption-based license model. And number 5, as in number 4, know who your user is and know what their requirements are. Number 6, security is not an option. It's not a nice to have, but it's something that must be built in from the ground up. And finally, in number 7, in the past this says something that you should think about really today. In the past, we had purchased for example, a large application, very, very likely with capabilities that we didn't want to need. Consider Microsoft Office, for example. We may need Outlook as our email client and PowerPoint for our presentations, but we may never use the Excel spreadsheet. And this is let alone all the unneeded functionality contained with the apps that we're actually using. On the other hand, today monetization is shifting away from the standalone application to more of a data-driven, consumption-based model. So please take this into mind. Here at SafeNet, we've been providing software monetization solutions for the IoT before there was even an IoT. During the course of my presentation, I hope you've seen that IoT in a nutshell is nothing new, similar to existing earlier interconnected ecosystems, but with increased connectivity, data collection, and greater needs for software product packaging and IP protection. Again, this is an area that we as SafeNet have been working for over 30 years now with over 15,000 customers worldwide. So this slide sort of encapsulates where we're at with SafeNet. We can work with any device. So from an embedded sensor level type device to a handheld device to a laptop or desktop to a server system to cloud-based systems as well. Any sales channel, whether you're selling directly to a customer, working with channel partners and resellers. We could work on any business model. Traditionally we work with the traditional perpetual or subscription-based license model, but as we saw in the presentation, customers are demanding more pay-per-use or usage-based, consumption-based models. We can work in that. And finally, any type of application delivery. Aside from the traditional delivering software on a CD or electronic download or DVD, we can work with an installed software already on a device, embedded device, pure play cloud SaaS application, or a hybrid that includes perhaps cloud and an embedded device. So that brings it over to our Q&A, and I'll ask Kyle if we have any questions that exist. Or please feel free to submit your questions at this time. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Hopefully this was an informative session. Right now, I don't see any questions, so I'll give you guys a few minutes if you want to type them up. But I guess that might be it then, Mark.
Okay, let's give a few seconds here.
Yep. Still nothing. Ada, okay, let's see.
Oh, okay. We got a question here. Okay, there was a question here. Can you please elaborate more on usage-based billing? Yes, sure. Our systems depend upon what you want, to measure, more or less. As far as tracking, the systems can track, clicks. How many times for example, how many times a application is used, how long an application is used, and anywhere in between. So we have customers that may want to measure bandwidth usage, for example, and this can be monetized. And again, as I mentioned, how many times a web page is clicked. The ways to bill for usage is sort of we can define it in many different ways. How not us as SafeNet, but we can facilitate that so that you can do that however ways you want to manage. And also, what happens is then after a certain period, that data is aggregated and then used for billing purposes. And it's a period that you define how often you want to collect that for billing information. Okay, another question. Okay, let's see, another question. How to determine a ceiling price for consumes? I'm not certain I understand that. How to determine a ceiling price for consumes? I'm not certain I understand that question. Okay.
There's another one here too, Mark.
Wait, consumers.
What would you consider to be an important enabler in monetizing?
What would you consider to be an important enabler in monetizing? Well, what you basically need is, in order to monetize, consider the fact that you need not only the IP protection side, which I covered, but you also need the licensing side. So consider the licensing side would be hooks within your software via an API to delineate where the software is being used. So, for example, you can have certain sections in your code that says, capability A. Let's simplify it into, let's say we're using Microsoft Notepad, for example, where you have copy and paste and print, and you can embed within this Notepad code, given that you have access to that, hooks within that API to delineate where each one of this functionalities exist. That would be another component of, to enable this monetization. So you would have the IP protection to protect that IP, to encrypt it, so that reverse engineering is not available, and then the licensing APIs to delineate where that software is being used. So that's one half of the monetization solution. The other half would be a business back-end solution. This would be utilized to monetize, to manage the entitlements, if you will. The licenses are sent to your end user. So you would send so that what end users are using what portions of software, and so you can send that out. So there's so just to recap, you would have the IP protection licensing side on one half, and then the business back end for license management on the other side. Hopefully that answered your question. And then there was another question here. Let's see.
And Mark, do you think the one
how to determine
a ceiling price? You think it was determining a ceiling
price
for customers?
For
determine a ceiling price for customers.
Consumers. So how would you determine a ceiling price for consumers? I still don't understand that question exactly. How would we as SafeNet determine it, or how would you as the software vendor determine it? I'm still not understanding that question.
I'm assuming as a software vendor, how would they price, their product now that they're doing an IoT strategy? How would they price it for the comparative versus what they used to do? Which I guess is, everyone's a different story.
Yeah, maybe Kyle, you could answer that. I'm the technical person.
Right. I guess it all depends. I mean, the whole way pricing is getting driven nowadays by consumers. So, a lot of consumers might only want to use the product once or twice or, for a month and that's it. So it all depends on your product. Is it a high value software or are you just trying to, have a free software with some add-on features? It all depends, honestly. There's no really a cookie-cutter way to sell and price the product.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to say. But
yeah, it's really, we could offer solutions from freemium to premium,
right.
basically, and everything in between. So, depending, like Kyle mentions, if you want to, send out trial software for a limited basis, you can do that. But then if you want to, manage the consumption, we can work with you, but it would essentially be up to you to decide how you wish to do that. And so you could have time-based licenses, execution-based licenses, perpetual-based licenses, consumption-based licenses, prepaid licenses, concurrent-based usages. All that is available depending upon, a lot of factors and how you wish to price it.
See.
Any more questions?
So I have another one as well, Mark.
Yes.
What new risks should a software vendor account for when entering the IoT space in an environment of constant connection? And I know you talked a little about security risks, but what are some other things you can think of?
Gosh, off the top of my head, is of course, security risks is of a primary concern. In the SWOT analysis, we mentioned the ever-changing regulations and determining, because data is so prevalent in this area and so important. It's where does that data lie? And so this is where. In the SWOT analysis, we mentioned threats and about the local regulations. For example, here in the U.S., we where as opposed to in Europe, privacy is much more tightly controlled, and so that could be of an issue. And so we mentioned to take that into account, and then of course again, I cannot overemphasize security. We constantly hear about it. I mentioned even during my presentation Home Depot, and Home Depot just had a breach just recently. So, this is all important as well. Anything else, Kyle?
All right, I don't see anything else. Not that I can see.
Okay, well. I guess that's it. So without further ado, I'll let you, Kyle, close it. How's that sound?
Yep. Yeah, and hopefully this was an informative session for you guys. I believe we will record this, and if you want to, and actually I'll be the guy reaching out to anyone who registered, so I will have a link for you guys if you want to send it to your colleagues or just to watch again. But yeah, once I get in touch with you guys, feel free to ask me any other questions you may or may not have, and I'd be more than happy to discuss a little bit more detail of how we can help addressing these issues. And I guess anything from there, we'll be in touch. So thanks for everyone for attending.
Thanks.